Thank you ever so much, Ian, and thank you, Ian and Emma, for the invitation to speak today. As Ian pointed out, I'm based in Geography, School of Environment, Education and Development, and I've been researching this kind of broad challenge around cities and sustainability and how cities can become more sustainable for about, 20 years now. So today, the purpose is for me to kind of set up some of the bigger picture questions. Why are cities important when we want to think about sustainability and environmental challenges? And I'm hoping by the end of the talk that I'll have convinced you that cities are not only important, but they are the most important thing. If you are interested in the environment, climate change and so on, cities should be at the top of your agenda. And throughout, I'll pick up a few of the kind of broader challenges, the different dimensions of the urban challenge and how cities relate to sustainability. And hopefully that will set up the second talk where Johnny will bring it home to Manchester, and that will set up some good discussion afterwards. I'll try and keep it moving. If anyone just collapses from heat at any point, I'll take that as a sign to go even quicker. So some of you may be familiar with this graph at the top, United Nations population projection graph. The blue bars, the global population of people living in rural areas, the red in cities. You can see something interesting happened about 10 years ago. We became an urbanized species for the first time in our history. More people live in cities than not. And as you can see, this is a trend that's only going to continue. This graph at the bottom, this figure at the bottom, breaks this down regionally into continents. And you can see these red bars, population by 2030, there's going to be a lot of people living in cities in Asia, a huge increase in the number of people in Africa living in cities, and also Latin America to some extent. So we're going to have a lot more people. The population will stabilize around 10 billion in about 50, 60 years. Most of those new people are going to be living in new cities in Asia and informal settlements in these continents. And Europe, of course, is supposed to be trying to figure out some of the ways we can make these cities good. And it is important we get these urban settlements right. Cities are arguably the key kind of perpetrators of climate change. So about 3/4 of carbon emissions come from cities. Cities only take up about 2% of land area, but they consume about 80% of the natural resources that we use. So cities are really, when we look at the causes driving climate change, environmental degradation, those causes are urban processes. The map in the top left here is simply a map of nitrogen dioxide emissions in the UK, an Environment Agency map, and you can see it's focused on the cities. That's where the pollution comes from. What does getting it wrong look like? Well, this is what getting it wrong looks like. Classic American sprawl, motor society. Why is it wrong? Well, it kind of creates a low-density style of city. So if you live in a place like this, you can't walk to work, you can't walk to the shop, you can't walk to the school. You have to get in your car. Why isn't there any public transport there? Well, to support public transport, infrastructure investment is required. To make that investment profitable, you have to have a certain density of people to use it. So if you have a low density of people spread across a landscape, it definitely means you can't afford things like trains. And in classic sprawl, you can't even afford public buses, maybe one or two a day. The research shows that if the frequency of a bus service goes below one every 15 minutes, people don't use it. So if you're thinking about at a fundamental level why cities are important for sustainability, if we become too dispersed, we simply can't deliver infrastructure in an efficient way. It becomes very resource intensive. I think this picture is taken from Atlanta in the USA. The average person in Atlanta, the average inhabitant of Atlanta, consumes 750 gallons of oil a year. That's what's required for the average person to live there. That's pretty much non-optional. That's what it takes. Barcelona, the figure is less than 10% of that. 68 gallons of oil per year, the average inhabitant to live in Barcelona. My question to you is, right, who's been to Atlanta? Hands up. Who's been to Barcelona? Who would rather live in Atlanta? Who would rather live in Barcelona? So this is another key point, I think. Too often sustainability is set up as we can't have the things we want, we must consume less, we must do less, life must become really miserable and crap and we have to turn the lights out. There's absolutely not the truth about this. Most of the best places in the world to live are the most sustainable places. The challenge, and we know that, we all know that. The challenge is how we make places like that, how we stop doing this and start creating sustainable places that we want to live. Another illustration of the different space needs of different kinds of infrastructure, this time transport. So this is the same number of people. This is those people on bikes. This is those people, they all fit in one bus. This is those people, one in each car. You can see the cars take up a hell of a lot of space. At the moment, we essentially have cities that are designed for cars. They're not designed for people, they're designed for cars. Most of our cities, about half of the surface area is devoted to the motor car. Cars, car parks, driveways, garages, and so on. These are the places we're supposed to live. Going back to that population explosion graph at the start, we've become very good at surviving. We've learned how to survive. We can all live longer. Infants don't die so much anymore. But I put it to you that we haven't actually figured out how to live properly yet. We're still kind of building not fit for purpose environments for us to live in. And cities, understanding how to build better cities is part of that. This is an important challenge. This is not real. This is a scale model of one of the new central business districts planned in Tianjin in China. Tianjin's about an hour from Beijing on the bullet train. Not many people are really familiar with Tianjin, but it's got 15 million people in it. That's the equivalent population of Sweden and Norway put together. In fact, it's more than Sweden and Norway put together in one city. They've already got one CBD. They're trying to build 2 more. Now, as a geographer, I didn't point out that the central business district is kind of a singular concept. You're only supposed to have one in a city. Classic China, they're having 3. But you can see the scale of planned development here. Getting this kind of thing right is critical, because there's going to be hundreds more of these kinds of things appearing over the next couple of decades. Go to Africa. This is Kampala, capital of Uganda, currently about 2.5–3 million population. A paper published over summer, which was taking median population trend projections up to the end of the century, suggested there could be 40 million people living in Kampala by 2100. Now, they're not going to be living in tower blocks and things like that. They're going to be living in informal style settlements. These are big questions about how these places are planned, whether they can be sustainable or not. The city is also essentially an essential part of the climate change story because it's a victim. It's a victim of climate change. Anyone tell me what this is a picture of? Yep, New Orleans, 05, Katrina, the flood, when the levee broke, and the general shock that a major city in the developed world could basically be destroyed by a single natural disaster. Most probably due to the strengthening of hurricane intensity due to climate change. And almost all the adverse effects of climate change are going to be concentrated in cities. Heat waves, the deaths are always concentrated in cities due to the urban heat island effect. When you think about disruption to food chains and agriculture, it's going to be the cities that potentially get hit hardest by that because they are dependent upon food from elsewhere. They don't produce their own food at the moment. So there's yet another reason to focus our attention on cities from a sustainability point of view. They're the places that are going to suffer most from the consequences of climate change. And I think as a result of this, you're seeing the emergence of cities, mayors of cities, different urban organizations as leaders in the climate change field, trying to take the lead. So the C40 group, who set up agreement between mayors of some of the biggest cities in the world, to take action on climate change, driven in part by frustration at the lack of progress in international climate talks, lots of agreements, not much action, and the feel that cities are now the places action has to happen, so why not act directly? This is an extremely complex graph. It was made, I think it was put together by McKinsey for a Scandinavian hydroelectric power company. And it was essentially looking at a whole load of climate change mitigation strategies and the cost of abatement per ton of carbon emissions avoided. So anything below the line is cost effective. For every pound you spend on that technology, you are saving carbon in a cost efficient manner. Everything above is actually not very efficient. It's going to cost you lots. It's a great graph. We talk about it a lot. I don't want to talk about it a lot. I want to show you some of the things down here. Building insulation. Where are all the buildings? Cities. Fuel efficiency in commercial vehicles. All the depots servicing cities. Lighting systems, cities. Air conditioning, cities. Water heating, cities. Most of these no regrets technologies and options are essentially focused on cities. So the solutions we should be chasing as well are cities. And this is nothing new. People have been thinking about how we can live in cities, create better cities for hundreds of years. Is anyone familiar with this picture?
The concept of the perfect city layout.
Yeah, the Garden City, Ebenezer Howard, 1897. Classic kind of response to industrialization in the UK, which created these big dirty cities with poor sanitation, unhealthy populations, spawned the idea, the Garden City movement, the idea of a high-density city located in this kind of lovely green expanse. Satellite cities, good transport between them. We've not moved on so much from this. This is 120 years old. This is not much different to current thinking. We want nice high-density cities, quality natural environment around. Whether we need homes for inebriates and insane asylums, I leave that up to you guys. That's details. Here's something else, another attempt to rethink the city in a kind of radical sustainability sense. This is called Lilypad, which was designed by a Belgian architect called Vincent Calgro. And it's intended to be a floating city, a self-contained floating ecosystem city. So it can clean its own water, it can produce its own food, and best of all, for when the Antarctic ice cap melts and the sea levels go up by 60 meters, it can just float. It just floats around. It's the perfect adaptation as well. Here's an artist's impression of Songdo in South Korea, just outside Seoul. This city is now half built. It's supposed to be a smart city. This is their answer to the sustainability challenge. Everyone hates it. No one is moving there because it's completely soulless. It has no sense of place, no richness of character. So a lot of the solutions that are actually being put into practice at the moment are not being very successful. A lot of the solutions that are being driven purely by technology, not very successful. There's an increasing recognition around the world that we need to pay attention to what people actually like. Fine-grained urban landscapes, smaller shops, livable streets, quality of life, green infrastructure, being able to walk places. It's not rocket science. But, and this is, I've kind of described my research as looking at urban governance these days. Governance is not the most exciting topic, but if you want to understand how to actually make things happen, you need to know about governance. I would say when it comes to climate change and sustainability, we all agree on the problem, and we actually have most of the solutions. But then when things happen, the solutions don't quite get put into practice. And the question becomes why? And this is the conundrum of change. We know what the problem is, but how do we actually put it into practice? What is that miracle? I like this quote from Buckminster Fuller about building the new model that makes the old model obsolete. And we see cities trying to do this now. We see the emergence of experimentation, kind of trying new things. It's become apparent that global climate treaties are not going to tell us how we should change our neighbourhoods or build a new neighbourhood. That's not going to happen. I don't think technology is going to tell us either. We have to try things out in practice. So we're getting this profusion of urban experiments, if you like. This is Vauban, the eco-district just outside Freiburg in Germany, which has been in existence for, I think, over 10 years now. Completely car-free, very successful. These are some examples or some pictures from Amsterdam. The Dutch, having reclaimed much of their land from the sea, are extremely inventive, have a history of experimentation in terms of different ways to use space. At the bottom you can see their response to the student housing crisis in the cities. Take some excess drainage pipes and put students in there. Again, more examples from Holland. Amsterdam, Eberg development, bottom left, floating residential area. Getting to work by boat, what fun. Top right, the floating church. These kinds of different ways of thinking through the city and how we can do cities. Transformation is possible. Having said change is hard, it's easy to get dispirited. One of the key challenges to thinking about cities is actually understanding when change does happen quickly. On the left here, the famous example of a stretch of Broadway in New York that's been pedestrianised. Home of the motor car, America, but part of Broadway's been pedestrianised. You see the street life that's opened up. I could tell you the story about Copenhagen as well, probably the city that's done most to popularise pedestrianisation and prove that it's great for the city, great for the economy, great for culture, great for tourism. Top right, a slightly lesser known example, electric mopeds and electric motorbikes in China. A lot of Chinese cities banned motorbikes in the city centre because they're too noisy and they're dangerous apparently, cause road accidents. So everyone went out and got electric mopeds instead. And this happened pretty much in the space of months. An entire transport system decarbonised. Now you could argue they plug in to charge and there's a coal station producing electricity, but in terms of changing an entire technology, really rapid. What I would say there though, just in terms of challenges, just to add one other thing in, is there's a lot more going on there apart from just regulations. There's also different technologies that need to come to the table, different behaviours. So people then have to learn to plug their bikes in somewhere rather than refuel them. Different repair skills and maintenance skills. So I think one of the challenges of understanding change in relation to sustainability transitions is understanding all those elements that have to come together to make change possible. Anyone recognise this? Yes, back home. Now we're home. Manchester, Northern Quarter, the greening projects in the Northern Quarter. Change is happening right here. So some of the things to pick up on, the challenges around this. How do you make these changes happen? Do we need, well, we do need new ways of working. We need ways to create these quadruple helixes where academia, government, industry, and people, communities, citizens, users come together to work together to create cities in different ways. And there's a challenge here because the good old Victorians who built all our urban infrastructure about 150 years ago, this is what they thought of risk. They loved it. The riskier, the better. This is very much not what most large organisations think about risk now. Most large organisations think the exact opposite. So there are a number of challenges around making change happen. These new ways of living, sharing cities, Uber, is essentially a way for me not to have a car and me to share someone else's car. And there's all sorts of other sharing systems now coming across cities, which are essentially enabling more of us to use resources more efficiently. So the average privately owned car spends 98% of its life sat on a driveway turned off. That is not an efficient use of resource. There's an awful lot of things like that in our cities. So sharing and the social innovation that goes along with that. Coming back to the social dimension, this is a box bike in Netherlands. So from a UK point of view, if you went out and cycled around like that, you'd probably get stopped and told off by a lot of people. Dangerous to the kid, no helmet, on the phone, wrong attire, not on a cycle path. But in Holland, they've created a system where all of this is actually possible because they realise it's desirable. It's good to be able to cycle in whatever you want, not to have to wear trousers and proper cycling gear. People cycle in suits and dresses because the bikes are designed in such a way that you can sit up properly. All the chains are guarded. All these little things that go together to make that possible. So when I think about sustainability in cities, it's not just about technology and planning and where you put houses and where you put shops. It's all of these little nuances that enable a different way of being in an urban environment. Funding, obviously funding. A lot of the projects you look at that are good, you find there's this thing at the top. There's a subsidy somewhere. A government or public body or a charity has subsidized it. If we're talking about making solutions generally applicable, rolling them out, we need to think of ways to do them without needing a subsidy. The impacts thing is critical, needing to understand what works. So if we do get a good solution, something that works, understanding the benefits from it, so that you can then go to other people and say, look, it did A, B, and C. It will save you this money. It will make people happy. Rather than just saying, look, isn't it great? Which tends to be what happens now. This, by the way, on the right is Bedsted, Beddington Zero Energy Development in South London. It's one of the first zero energy developments in the UK. Been hugely successful. Does the rest of London look like this? No. Do any new housing developments in London look like this? No. Why? That's a solution proven right there. How can we make these things happen elsewhere? Some ways to think about this. This is the research I'm interested in at the moment. How you can learn from doing things in urban environments. How you can stage urban experiments and actually monitor them and figure out what works. I won't talk about this slide. I could talk about this. This is Mazda. This is a place that has been built purely to stage urban experiments and learn from them. Manchester also has a living lab. Oxford Road Corridor is pitched as its living lab, where we're going to try out new ways of doing cities, new forms of sustainability that will help Manchester as a whole become more sustainable. But the idea is also to develop new urban solutions that can be used anywhere in the world. So we have this kind of thing going on here. What's our role as a university in supporting this? Well, I think it goes back to that question about learning and capturing impacts. When you talk to most organisations grappling with challenges around sustainability and cities, they have knowledge needs. They have needs, they need to know what the situation is now in regards to many things. They need to understand what will happen if they do X, Y, or Z. What will people think of it? What technologies are out there? We're a university who are good at researching things and providing knowledge and information. So for me, there's a key role at the moment. There's an appetite out there to make things better, but there's knowledge needs to do that. And we're a university. I think we have a potentially huge role to play in supporting that. Okay, thank you.